Welcome to the set of Prairie Fire. I'm Sarah Edwards. Now we're on a set that's still very much under construction. So behind me on this barn door, we'll have our Prairie Fire logo, and we'll be adding a few more things over the next few weeks to really make it look great. The debut officially of Prairie Fire is May 18th at 7:30. But you know, it's still Jazz Month here at Illinois Public Media. We're still celebrating, so we thought we would kick things off on Prairie Fire by showing you a special short documentary about jazz bass legend Christian McBride. He was at the University of Illinois about a year ago, giving master classes, but also performing in his special civil rights themed work called The Movement Revisited.
So when I started writing The Movement Revisited, I knew there was going to be spoken word on top of this. So I guess my first thought was, don't have too much movement underneath the voices. I want people to hear the voices. Just. In 1998, I received a commission from the Portland, Maine Art Society. They asked if I could write a piece of music for their Black History Month programming. And they said the only stipulation of this commission is that you have to use a gospel choir. I had no experience writing for voices. I barely know what I'm doing, writing music without words. And I thought, well, what's the subject going to be? What am I going to write about? So I decided to pick 4 people who really meant a lot to me: Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, and obviously Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. really meant a lot to me as a kid. So we played this piece, and we played 4 concerts in New England in 1998, and that was it. I thought I'd never played a piece again. 10 years later, in 2008, my boss at the time says, "Hey, I read somewhere that you wrote a piece of music like 10 years ago for Black History Month. Tell me about that." "Yeah, that's a piece I wrote for my big band and 4 narrators and a gospel choir. It's called The Movement Revisited." And she said, "Oh, big band, gospel choir? That sounds interesting. Let's do it." I actually didn't think she was going to say yes. So when she said yeah, I went, oh boy. So now I got to get to work. And so I actually rewrote the piece from scratch. And we finally got to record it in 2013, and it was released in 2020, just weeks before the pandemic.
Our genius personified, Philly's own, Christian McBride.
I was born and raised in Philadelphia, and I come from a family of musicians and people who were in the music industry. My father and my great uncle are both bass players, and my uncle, my mother's brother, was a promotions and advertising manager at WHAT Radio, which was a very popular radio station in Philly. So my childhood was going to a lot of live concerts and hearing a lot of music coming from all angles. A lot of rhythm and blues and soul music, a little bit of jazz, some Latin music. So my whole childhood was just immersed in music and hearing stories about the road. Now, obviously, I saw my father play a lot when I was a kid. By that time, he was playing with the legendary Cuban percussionist Mago Santamaria. In one concert, Dizzy Gillespie was the guest soloist with the band. And after it was over, my dad took me backstage to meet Dizzy. Mel Torme was there that night, Ella Fitzgerald, I believe, Dexter Gordon. So he takes me back in the dressing room area, and I see all these musicians, all these legends. And, I was in awe. I went home and I told my mother I wanted to play the electric bass. And without flinching, she said, okay. She bought me my first electric bass a year later. My dad's, he showed me how to play my first song, which was The Temptations' Papa Was a Rolling Stone. Much to my delight, it actually came rather quickly. I was like, oh, wow, okay. I can do this. After that, it just kind of snowballed. I really fell in love with playing the electric bass. My mother saw that and basically said, okay, since you're serious about this, let's get serious. The first day of orchestra rehearsal, we were put into this room and they basically said, pick your instrument. And you can't play the electric bass guitar in an orchestra, so I said, well, what's the next best instrument? Trombone. I couldn't get any sound out of the trombone. And the brass instructor, he said, well, I understand you play the electric bass. I said, yes. He said, well, you should play the double bass. I don't really want to play the double bass. He's like, no, we really could. I think what he was trying to do is get me to put the trombone down, He said, no, we could really use a double bass in the orchestra. You should try it. So I always credit, that man's name was Kevin Rogers. I always credit Mr. Rogers for making the most important decision anyone's ever made for me in my life. I think the minute I started playing the electric bass and could, figured out that I wasn't that bad at it, I knew I wanted to be a professional musician. But I didn't know what kind of music I wanted to play. I didn't really care. That kind of changed when I met Wynton Marsalis. Wynton Marsalis came to Philadelphia just before my 15th birthday. I had never seen a young, successful black man in pop culture wearing a suit, quoting Ralph Ellison, and somehow comparing jazz improvisation with American democracy. It's like he was like the anti-pop star, but he was a star. Meeting Wynton and being around him, that's when I knew I wanted to be a jazz musician. I never quite understood why jazz has such a stigma to it. Jazz has never been viewed as something that's fun. It's viewed as something that's always too intellectualized, something that's always abstract, too hard to follow. And then, jazz musicians are so indignant. You can't talk to them about anything other than jazz. I'm trying really hard to fix that. I mean, I can't do it alone, but I want people to be able to come see me perform and be like, hey, that actually was cool. I actually could follow it. This was not too over-intellectual. So basically, it's just that cycle over and over and over again, but it keeps building. So by the time you get to the end of the overture, we hold the last chord and, then it goes into the first movement, the first song.
Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that.
It's a no-brainer for me to do this. Being in high school, people like Bobby Watson and Wynton Marsalis and Red Rodney, Grover Washington Jr., these legends would come and talk to us. Knowing what I know now about being on the road, they didn't have to take time out of their busy day to come and talk to us, but they did. I'm so grateful for that. I thought if I were ever in that same position, to be able to talk to some young musicians coming up, no brainer for me. I'm always down to do that.